I'm Emily. I was diagnosed with stage 4 Burkitt lymphoma, a type of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, in November of 2022. I had a lot of weird things happen. At first, I was just really sick for a long time, and it was flu season, so we were hoping it was just a virus that would pass. But then I just kept getting sick, and then I noticed that my speech was changing. And when I stuck my tongue out, I couldn't stick it out straight. It was like deviating to the left. So that was when first really figured that something was wrong. Um, I remember I saw a hematologist for something outside of cancer, and she ruled out stroke. That was her first concern, but then they didn't really figure out what it was. And so I just let it go for a while, but then I kept getting sicker, and then I noticed an abscess in my right breast, um, and went to the gynecologist for that. She ordered a mammogram, and um, the hospital that I first went to for that just tried to send me home with antibiotics. I was getting night sweats, petechia, like tiny flat dots all over my legs, which was a sign of low platelets. And um, it wasn't until I went to the ER one night just because all of this was continuing to add up. And I kept like almost passing out. That's how weak I was. And the ER had me see a neurologist. The neurologist misdiagnosed me with something called Eagle syndrome and referred me to an ENT. So when I went to see the ENT, she was the first person to to tell me she thought something was seriously wrong and that I should see palliative care, which was really scary because at the time I had only heard of palliative care in relation to end of life care. But yeah, she was the first person to take me seriously. So I went over a month being really sick to the point that when I was finally diagnosed, it was stage 4. It was the cancer was all throughout my bone marrow. It had really affected my spleen, and it had reached my central nervous system. That was why my tongue was deviating to the left. To be honest, at that point, I was so sick and out of it that I was just, there was a sense of relief in finally knowing what was wrong. But I was scared. I really didn't know what was going on. And I was also angry at the doctors who misdiagnosed me. Um, because I still wonder every day like where I would be now if they had found it sooner. A lot of doctors shrugged it off as like anxiety and like I'm too young for there to be something seriously wrong. I also want to add I was diagnosed with something called HLH at the same time. It's short for hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis. It's an autoimmune disorder that's sometimes comorbid with some types of cancer. And the doctors told me that if Burkitt hadn't killed me, the HLH was very close to killing me. I was told I needed 6 rounds of chemo inpatient and then a stem cell transplant as well. Chemo was really, really awful. I was in the hospital for just under 2 months for the first few rounds of chemo because my mucositis got so bad that I couldn't drink or eat. I couldn't swallow. Um, I lost 40 pounds in about a month and almost needed a feeding tube. So mucositis was definitely the worst symptom for me. It almost killed me. But I also had nausea, vomiting, intense fatigue, weakness. I fell a few times when I when I was going for walks and just trying to regain independence. And I think that mostly covers it. Oh, I lost my hair pretty quickly because my chemo was very aggressive. A lot of things happen during chemo that I feel like a lot of things happen for me, and I think this is the case for a lot of other survivor patients and survivors. My lymph node biopsy wound never healed. Like the chemo made it really hard for it to heal, so that was a big part of my journey. I eventually had to get a wound back because months after my lymph node biopsy, it hadn't healed. I also, after my third round of chemo, I was back at home and I had a stroke during treatment. I'm on a blood thinner for other reasons, and my doctors forgot to put me back on my blood thinner when my platelets started to rise. So I had a stroke during treatment, and my only sign was confusion. So it was really hard for my family and friends to recognize that something had happened. But it got to the point that I was so confused that I left my house and got into my neighbor's car because I was imagining that they were going to take me to chemo because I was supposed to go back for chemo soon. But yeah, I just wanted to add that a lot of things happen. Um, a lot of things can happen for a lot of patients and survivors at the same time that all of the treatment's going on. Another big part of my treatment was I had multiple lumbar punctures for the chemo to get to my central nervous system. Um, and then that's the main one. I had a lot of lumbar punctures. Like at a point, it was twice a week, and countless blood transfusions and platelet transfusions. That's a very common thing for blood cancer patients. They actually told me after my third round of chemo that they were highly recommending a stem cell transplant for me, because of the research of my cancer and stage 4. They had estimated I had an 84% chance of relapse within the first 3 years if I didn't do the stem cell transplant. Um, so as much as I didn't want to keep doing treatment, I agreed to do the stem cell transplant. I did apheresis. I did an autologous stem cell transplant, so I was able to use my own cells, thankfully. I did apheresis in April and all of the pre-tests. They have to make sure your lungs are healthy enough. They have to check your heart. They have to check your teeth. I did all of the pre-tests for it in April and then apheresis. And then I went to the hospital May 3rd, 2023 to start chemo for transplant because they give you a lethal dose to kill all of your stem cells and then replace them with healthy ones. May 10th, 2023 was my stem cell transplant. That was after a week of lethal chemo, so I was very exhausted, very sick. At that point, I had lost all of my eyebrow hair, even my eyelashes. I had bruises all over my face, because the chemo had hit so hard. But it was still exciting to get my healthy stem cells. I knew that it would be the cure for both my cancer and HLH. I had to isolate for the first 100 days. Um, I stayed in the hospital for the first 3 weeks post-transplant. Um, and then once I went home, I was allowed to go for walks outside and regain strength, but I couldn't go to public places. I couldn't go to anywhere with crowds. And I had to eat only um like pre-prepared foods or food prepared by someone close to me. Like I couldn't eat restaurant foods for the first 100 days. Um, but yeah, it took a really long time and a lot of physical therapy to regain strength after all the time in the hospital and all of the chemo. I was thankful enough to do physical therapy at home. And I had to relearn how to go back up the stairs. We moved my bed downstairs because I couldn't walk up the stairs. I had lost a lot of muscle and strength.
Happy 100th day. Happy 100th day.
During treatment, it, I mean, it was really hard mentally, but it took such a physical toll that I honestly for a lot of it, I wasn't as anxious or depressed as I normally would be, just because everything took my energy out of me. But I did go to therapy, and then after treatment, that's when it got really hard. Just everyone says to try to find your new normal, but that's way more difficult, in practice. So, I'm thankful enough that my hospital has a survivorship program, and they have a survivorship therapist. So I worked with her a lot, and talked to friends, spent time with friends when I was able. It was very isolating, during the first 100 days after transplant, just not being able to see people and not being able to go places. After the first 100 days, I got another bone marrow biopsy and PET scan and was told that I was in remission. Initially, I was very happy. It is a great thing to celebrate, but survivorship's also really hard. So I was hit pretty close, pretty soon after, with the feeling of like, oh, what do I do now? Like my life's just completely changed, but I need to get back to work. But also, I have no immune system because transplant just restarts your immune system. I have to get all my childhood vaccines again, and I work in special education. So, I felt a lot of pressure to return, and I did return by October, which looking back was a little soon. That was only 5 months after my transplant. Um, but I went back part-time initially, but it was still really hard and not the smartest decision, but I also didn't have much of a choice. I see my lymphoma specialist every 3 months, and then I still see the transplant clinic for vaccines every few months. I also just restarted immunotherapy, IVIG. My immunoglobulin is very low, which is contributing to me getting sick again. And yeah, so I still go to a lot of doctor's appointments. I would say at least once a week or every 2 weeks. I do worry about recurrence or relapse a lot. And, you know, getting the transplant did lower my risk, I think, to about 28%, which is a lot better than 84%, but it's still not a super low risk. So I do worry about that. Um, and it's hard not to especially get what the cancer community calls scanxiety around the time of scans. I do worry a lot. So far, they've all come back clear, but that anxiety is always there. A lot of people younger than me even get misdiagnosed because we're young, and um, if doctors took us seriously from the start, it could make a world's difference. And I'm really grateful for the online community because it's hard to find people in real life that have similar experiences that are my age, especially. I want people to remember to advocate for themselves. You know yourself best, and give yourself grace. And also find your community that makes all the difference. That's made all the difference for me.